Well, Friday night we had a coup of sorts in Russia, but it wasn't. But everyone said it was, but then it wasn't. And it sort of petered out, and now we're not sure what's going on there. And does it weaken Putin? Does it strengthen Putin? Does it show he's vulnerable, or does it show he's invulnerable? Take your pick. You'll find people taking all sides of this discussion. But let's talk to somebody who might know a little bit more than your average bear. She's the vice president of Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at Heritage, and she was the former deputy national security advisor under Robert O'Brien in the Trump administration. Victoria Coates, thanks for joining us, Victoria.
Thank you for having me, Larry.
Well, all right, you heard me set it up. I mean, I'm hearing people say this shows that Putin is weak, and other people say this strengthens Putin's hand. What's really going on?
Yeah, I think anybody who tells you they know what's going on right now who is not named Yevgeny Prigozhin or Vladimir Putin is lying to you.
You know what? I really, really appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
No, I mean, it's the number of people who claim to have inner knowledge of this is really remarkable. And I think, what it does demonstrate to me is Putin has successfully, over the last 2+ decades, managed security in Russia by pitting elements within his own Ministry of Defense, but then these external elements like Wagner or the Chechen militias, basically pitting them against each other. So none of them get too powerful and he can retain control. Now, the problem with that is eventually one of your pet scorpions tries to take out the other pet scorpion, and then you have a real problem on your hands, which is what I think erupted over the weekend.
Yeah, and listen, I have no love for Vladimir Putin, and if he were toppled, that would be fantastic. But when you learn about who the Wagner Group is and the kind of stuff that they've been involved in, there's no good guys over there, is there?
No, not at all. And one always has to be concerned about a worse monster, that in many ways Wagner is worse than the Russian Ministry of Defense. And of course, that's a pretty high bar, but they seem to be right up there on it. So I think particularly given the fact that Russia has the world's largest nuclear arsenal, we have to be concerned about destabilizing Russia. And we cannot assume after what happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall that democracy and capitalism will be embraced in Russia, with parades and flowers. It's just simply not the case. So if we don't want a bunch of dysfunctional little Russian breakaway states, each with their nuclear arsenal, we have to watch this extremely carefully and not be sort of carried away with romantic ideals of what might be possible in Russia.
What was more surprising to you, Victoria Coates, that the Wagner Group could actually mobilize and appear to make some inroads into some outlying towns on their way to Moscow? Or was it more surprising that Vladimir Putin was able to clamp down so quickly and so effectively?
I think the original incursion back into Russia was probably the most surprising. And, we still don't have confirmation of a lot of what was reported in terms of things being shot down. It isn't clear what actually happened. And then Prigozhin just resurfaced a little bit before we've been talking with an audio tape saying that he was never going to try to upset the Russian government. He was only protesting the conduct of the war in Ukraine and what he saw as a disproportionate burden being placed on his forces. And it'll be very interesting to see what Putin, who we have not yet heard from post-truce, what he says in response. Because if his promise to not bring charges against Prigozhin holds, it suggests that they might have been a little bit more coordinated in this episode than we know right now.
Do you think this will affect Vladimir Putin's approach and strategy to the Ukrainian war effort? Will this give him pause in terms of continuing down the path that he's been, or will it actually potentially make him double down and be that much more ruthless?
Well, this is going to be one of the critical questions, but one thing I want to encourage all your viewers to do is not get too tied up with Ukraine. Obviously, this is the most famous engagement of the Wagner forces. They have in many ways been critical in what success Russia has had in Ukraine. And I think the Ukrainians have been saying the right things about looking at this carefully and potentially pressing an advantage for them, which they should do. But this is far from the only place that Wagner is deployed. We have them in Libya, Sudan, Mali, Syria, all of the garden destinations throughout the Middle East and Africa. but then also in Venezuela. They're in our own hemisphere, and they were instrumental in putting down the protests against their dictator Maduro in 2019. So if this is one of the sort of tools Putin has been using to mess with our own hemisphere, if they are disrupted, this could be a real opportunity for us.
So that's actually quite chilling as well. And is the Wagner Group? I mean, how would you describe them in terms of something analogous to the West? Are they off books military? Is it like a private mercenary force at the whim of the president? Do the taxpayers of Russia actually pay for them? Should I give you more multiple choice questions? Who are these guys?
Well, yeah, tax revenues isn't really the way Russia finances anything. It's more a graft and exploitation system. But yes, I mean, they're more like a militia. If you think about the groups that, say, the Iranians deploy, Hamas, Hezbollah, throughout the Middle East, kind of do their bidding. It's more along those lines.
Well, those are
where,
all, we categorize them as terrorist groups. Would it be appropriate to sort of thumbnail Wagner Group as a terrorist organization?
You know, this is something we've looked at. We looked at it in the Trump administration because their behavior is pretty atrocious. And, you know, if you look at what they've done, you know, in Ukraine, in Africa, you know, it's torture, it's serial rape, you know, just execution style murders. And so, you know, these are not a group of freedom fighting angels. And I certainly think, you know, that reality needs to be brought home to folks that, you know, despite the kind of romantic view of this dash to Moscow, these are absolutely not the people you want to put in charge. They're very, very dangerous.
A few years ago, you worked in the White House in a national security capacity. I've learned more and heard more concise, cohesive explanation of what's going on here from you in the last 8 minutes than we did all weekend long from anybody from the Biden administration. Was it a mistaken opportunity for somebody from this White House to come out and sort of explain to the American people what was happening?
Well, it was certainly very timid, and apparently their explanation is they didn't want to be accused by the Russians of meddling. Well, I can tell you one thing that for sure, which is the United States will be accused of meddling. So trying to avoid that is, you know, you're baking failure into your approach. And I think that we really could have used hearing from the commander in chief, particularly about the nuclear weapon issue, the visual of the Secretary of State convening a series of European foreign ministers was not exactly the sign of strength that I think we all could have used.
Yeah.
And you know the you know, cancellation of the Pentagon trip to Israel, it seems completely unnecessary at this point. Like they didn't really know what was going on. So yeah, I think they could have been a lot more forward-leaning, particularly if this is a case where Russia is you know, on less sure footing.
Yeah, and they hardly projected the steady hand, at least from where I was sitting. Real fast, we only have about half a minute left, but I just want to clear this up. Does the Wagner Group actually have at their disposal nuclear weapons of any sort?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
That would really surprise me. That's held by the Ministry of Defense. Now, you know, that said, in the breakdown of the Soviet Union, there were a lot of small tactical nukes that were floating around. We now have them in Belarus. So you can't say for sure, and we should watch that too.
All right, Victoria Coach, we'll leave it there, but great stuff. And congratulations on the new gig there at Heritage Foundation. We look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you, Larry.
There's more to come on O'Connor tonight. You are watching the Salem News Channel.